Throughout history, the image of Jesus has been shaped by different cultures, traditions, and artistic interpretations. But beyond the paintings and portrayals, one question remains: who was Jesus? And what did he truly look like? The answer to this question is not just about history or theology. It is about identity, truth, and reclaiming a powerful narrative that has often been overlooked. For centuries, people have accepted a version of Jesus that was given to them rather than seeking the truth for themselves. But today, we are here to open our eyes, to examine the clues left within the scriptures, and to challenge the perspectives that are understanding. Because the truth is not hidden, it is written in the very verses that have been read for generations. Understanding the historical and biblical context of Jesus' appearance is not about division, it is about empowerment. It is about recognizing that the image of holiness, strength, and leadership has always belonged to those who have been marginalized, overlooked, and forgotten. When we uncover these truths, we do not just reshape history, we reshape how we see ourselves. Today, I will share 5 powerful clues found in biblical verses that suggest a different image of Jesus, an image that reflects strength, resilience, and identity in ways that many have ignored. And as we walk through these clues, let this be a reminder: truth has always been within our reach. It is up to us to seek it, embrace it, and let it inspire us to walk with greater confidence, purpose, and understanding. Clue 1, the description of his hair and skin. One of the most compelling clues about Jesus' appearance comes from the book of Revelation 1:14-15, which describes his hair and skin in striking detail. The passage states, "His head and his hairs were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were as a flame of fire, and his feet like unto fine brass, as if they burned in a furnace, and his voice as the sound of many waters." These words are often overlooked or misinterpreted, but when examined closely, they reveal important insights about his physical appearance. First, let's focus on the phrase, "his hair was like wool." The texture of wool is significant because it refers to a hair type that is thick, coarse, and tightly curled. Throughout history, woolly hair has been a defining characteristic of people of African descent. Unlike straight or wavy hair, woolly hair has a natural coil and density that closely resembles the texture described in the scripture. This is not just a poetic or symbolic reference, it is a direct description of Jesus' hair texture, challenging the widely accepted depictions of him with straight, flowing hair. The color of his hair is also noteworthy. The verse states that hair was white like wool, as white as snow. This description does not negate the texture, but instead adds another layer to his appearance. The whiteness of the hair could symbolize wisdom, age, or divine radiance, but it does not change the fact that the texture remains that of wool. Many historical figures, including African elders and leaders, have had tightly coiled hair that turns white with age. This reinforces the idea that Jesus' features were not European in nature, but rather aligned with characteristics found among darker-skinned people. Next, we must examine the description of his feet, which the verse states were like fine brass, as if burned in a furnace. This is an extremely important detail because brass is a metal that has a brownish golden tone. However, the verse does not stop at saying his feet were like brass. It goes further to say they looked as if they had been burned in a furnace. When something is burned in a furnace, it darkens significantly. This means that Jesus' skin was not just a light tan or olive tone, as many traditional depictions suggest, but rather a deep, rich, dark complexion. This imagery is powerful because it directly challenges the mainstream portrayal of Jesus with pale skin. The depiction of a dark-skinned Jesus aligns more closely with the historical and geographical context of where he was born and raised. Jesus was born in Bethlehem, in the Middle East, and spent time in Egypt and surrounding regions where people of darker complexions were common. The Mediterranean and African influence in that region during biblical times suggests that his skin tone would naturally reflect that of the people around him. Additionally, The historical reality of Jesus' ancestry supports the idea that he was not a fair-skinned man. His lineage traces back to the tribes of Israel, a people who lived in regions that were heavily influenced by African, Middle Eastern, and Semitic genetics. The people of that era were known for having darker skin tones, and Jesus, as a man who walked among them, would have shared similar physical traits. The significance of these descriptions goes beyond just physical appearance. They carry deep cultural and spiritual meaning. For centuries, the image of Jesus has been reshaped to fit different narratives, often reflecting European truths rather than the historical reality. This alteration has had a profound impact on how people perceive divinity, identity, and self-worth. By revisiting what the scripture actually says, we reclaim a truth that has been overshadowed by artistic reinterpretations. Understanding this truth is empowering, especially for those who are marginalized or made to feel that they are not reflected in spiritual leadership. Seeing Jesus as a man with woolly hair and dark skin allows people of African descent to connect with him in a deeper and more personal way. It reinforces the idea that divinity is not tied to a specific racial image, but is inclusive of all people, especially those who have historically been overlooked. The description of Jesus' hair and skin in Revelation is not just a minor detail. It is a powerful affirmation that challenges misconceptions and opens the door to a broader, more inclusive understanding of history and spirituality. It serves as a reminder that truth has always been present in the scriptures, waiting to be acknowledged and embraced. Clue 2. Jesus' connection to Africa. One of the most compelling and often overlooked aspects of Jesus' life is his deep connection to Africa. From the very beginning of his earthly journey, Africa played a crucial role in his survival, protection, and historical identity. This connection is not accidental. It is a significant clue that provides deeper insight into his heritage and the world he lived in. When we examine the biblical evidence, it becomes clear that Africa was not just a place Jesus visited. It was a place that shaped his early years and reinforced his connection to a lineage that has long been marginalized. One of the strongest pieces of evidence for Jesus' connection to Africa comes from Matthew 13:15, where an angel appeared to Joseph in a dream and instructed him to take Mary and the infant Jesus to Egypt. This was a matter of life and death, as King Herod had ordered the massacre of all male children under the age of 2 in Bethlehem in an attempt to eliminate the prophesied Messiah. Egypt, a land on the African continent, became a place of refuge for the Holy Family, sheltering them from the threat of persecution. This moment is significant for several reasons. First, Joseph and Mary were able to take Jesus into Egypt and live among the people there without drawing attention to themselves. This implies that their appearance was similar to the people of that region. If Jesus and his parents had looked significantly different, such as having fair skin and European features, they would have stood out as foreigners. Instead, they were able to blend in, which strongly suggests that they shared physical similarities with the African and Middle Eastern populations of that time. The fact that Jesus spent part of his childhood in Africa also challenges the long-held assumption that his life was geographically and culturally separate from African heritage. Many people have been led to believe that biblical history is entirely centered around the Middle East and Europe. But in reality, Africa was a central part of the story. Egypt, Ethiopia, and other African regions played key roles in the biblical narrative, serving as places of refuge, wisdom, and divine intervention. Beyond Jesus' time in Egypt, Africa's connection to biblical history extends even further. Throughout the Old and New Testaments, African nations are mentioned frequently. For example, Moses, one of the most important figures in biblical history, was raised in Egypt. His wife, Zipporah, was a Cushite Ethiopian, meaning she was of African descent. The Queen of Sheba, who visited King Solomon and brought him gifts of gold and spices, was also from an African kingdom. These connections demonstrate that Africa was not a peripheral or secondary location in biblical history. It was central to it. Another key figure that connects Jesus to Africa is Simon of Cyrene, the man who was compelled to carry Jesus' cross on the way to his crucifixion. Cyrene was an ancient city located in what is now modern-day Libya in North Africa. Simon was an African man who, whether by fate or divine purpose, became part of one of the most crucial moments in Jesus' journey. His presence in this story further solidifies the deep-rooted connection between Africa and the life of Jesus. Recognizing Jesus' connection to Africa is not just about historical accuracy. It is about reclaiming a truth that has often been downplayed or ignored. For centuries, religious and artistic interpretations have attempted to separate Jesus from his African and Middle Eastern roots, presenting him instead as a figure with European features. This misrepresentation has had a profound impact on how different cultures see themselves in relation to divinity, worth, and identity. For people of African descent, acknowledging Jesus' connection to Africa is a source of empowerment. It serves as a reminder that divinity has never been exclusive to one race or region, and that Africa has always been a place of significance in spiritual history. This understanding challenges outdated narratives and encourages a broader, more inclusive perspective on faith and heritage. Jesus' time in Africa is a powerful testament to the continent's role in the biblical story. It was a place of safety, a place of historical connection, and a place where he and his family found refuge from oppression. This clue is not just about geography. It is about identity. It reaffirms that Africa has always been part of the divine narrative, and that its people have always played a significant role in the unfolding of history. By acknowledging and embracing this truth, we not only correct misconceptions, but also inspire a greater sense of belonging, strength, and purpose. Jesus' connection to Africa is undeniable, and it is time for this knowledge to be recognized, celebrated, and taught as an essential part of the biblical legacy. Clue 3. The lineage of Jesus. The lineage of Jesus is one of the most powerful indicators of his true identity, heritage, and historical background. Far from being a figure detached from the realities of race and ethnicity, Jesus' genealogy connects him to a rich and diverse ancestry deeply rooted in Middle Eastern and African history. By examining the biblical accounts of his lineage, we uncover a truth that has often been overlooked or misrepresented. Jesus was descended from a people of color, and his bloodline included individuals with strong African and Middle Eastern ties. The Gospel of Matthew 1:17 provides a detailed genealogy of Jesus, tracing his lineage back through King David and ultimately to Abraham. This lineage is significant because it includes figures who are not only of Israelite descent, but also of African and non-Israelite heritage. Understanding who these ancestors were and where they came from helps us paint a clearer picture of Jesus' ethnic and racial identity. One of the most notable ancestors in Jesus' genealogy is Rahab, a Canaanite woman who played a crucial role in biblical history. Rahab was a resident of Jericho, and when Israelite spies came to scout the land, she protected them, securing the survival of her family. Because of her faith and actions, she was welcomed into the lineage of Israel and became an ancestor of Jesus. The Canaanites, historically, were people of dark complexion, and their connection to African and Semitic bloodlines further reinforces the diversity within Jesus' genealogy. Another important figure is Ruth, a Moabite woman who became the great-grandmother of King David. The Moabites, like the Canaanites, were a people who lived in the region surrounding Israel and had historical ties to both Middle Eastern and African nations. Ruth's inclusion in Jesus' lineage is significant because it shows that his ancestry was not limited to one ethnic group, but was instead a mixture of various peoples who had come together through faith, love, and divine purpose. One of the strongest African connections in Jesus' bloodline comes through King Solomon, the son of King David and Bathsheba. While Bathsheba is often simply described as the wife of David, her identity suggests a connection to the African region. Furthermore, Solomon had a famous interaction with the Queen of Sheba, a powerful African ruler who visited him to test his wisdom and bring him gifts of gold, spices, and other treasures. Some historical and biblical interpretations suggest that Solomon and the Queen of Sheba may have had a child together, further linking Jesus' ancestry to African heritage. In Song of Solomon 1:05, Solomon himself declares, "I am black and beautiful, O daughters of Jerusalem." This passage has been widely debated, but it remains one of the strongest biblical affirmations of African identity within the lineage of Israelite kings. If Solomon, an ancestor of Jesus, identified himself in this way, it strongly supports the idea that Jesus' ancestry was tied to people of color. The genealogy of Jesus also includes individuals like Tamar, another Canaanite woman, and Boaz, a descendant of Rahab, further emphasizing that his lineage was diverse and included people from different backgrounds. When we acknowledge this diversity, we recognize that the biblical narrative has always been inclusive of African and Middle Eastern peoples. Even though much of history has attempted to portray Jesus as a figure of European descent, why does this matter? Because identity shapes perception. For centuries, many people of African descent have been led to believe that Christianity and biblical history are separate from their heritage. However, when we look at the truth written in Scripture, we see that Jesus' ancestors were a blend of African, Middle Eastern, and Semitic peoples. His lineage was not one of privilege, but one of struggle, resilience, and faith, qualities that reflect the realities of many people who have been marginalized throughout history. Understanding Jesus' lineage is about more than just history. It is about reclaiming a legacy. It is about recognizing that the story of salvation is deeply intertwined with Africa and its people. It is about restoring a truth that has been hidden for too long and allowing people to see themselves reflected in the greatest story ever told. When we embrace the reality of Jesus' diverse and rich lineage, we empower ourselves with the knowledge that faith has always included people of color. We see that holiness, leadership, and divine purpose have never been limited to one racial or ethnic group. Instead, they have been woven into a history that belongs to all of humanity, especially those whose ancestors have played a crucial role in shaping the biblical world. Jesus' lineage is a testament to the beauty of diversity, the strength of those who came before him, and the undeniable connection between African and Middle Eastern history and the foundation of faith itself. By recognizing and embracing this truth, we not only correct misconceptions, but also affirm that the story of Jesus is a story for all people, especially those who have been historically misrepresented or erased from the narrative. Clue 4. The people he walked among. One of the most revealing aspects of Jesus' identity is the company he kept. The people he walked among, taught, healed, and uplifted. His presence was not among the privileged elite, the rulers, or the wealthy. Rather, he chose to dwell among the marginalized, the poor, the oppressed, and those who were looked down upon by society. By examining the people he interacted with, we gain a clearer understanding of his identity and the environment in which he lived. The people he associated with were not of European descent, but rather of African, Middle Eastern, and Semitic heritage, further reinforcing the truth about his own background. One of the most important clues comes from Isaiah 53:2, which prophesies about Jesus, stating, "He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him." This description is profound because it suggests that Jesus did not fit the conventional standards of beauty at the time. In a region where darker skin tones were the norm, this verse implies that Jesus was not physically striking in a way that made him stand out as special. Instead, he looked like the everyday people of his community, people of color who lived in the regions of Israel, Egypt, and beyond. Jesus spent time with fishermen, farmers, tax collectors, lepers, and those who were socially rejected. His disciples, the very men who followed him closely, were working-class individuals who lived in the regions of Galilee and Judea. These regions were home to people of mixed heritage, including Israelites, Canaanites, and other Semitic groups who often had darker skin tones. The fact that Jesus blended in so well with them is further evidence that he did not have the European features that many later depictions assign to him. Another important clue comes from the encounters Jesus had with people from African regions. One of the most notable examples is Simon of Cyrene, the man who was forced to carry Jesus' cross on the way to his crucifixion. Cyrene was a city in what is now modern-day Libya in North Africa. This means that Simon was likely a dark-skinned African man, and his presence in such a significant moment of Jesus' journey underscores the deep connection between Africa and the biblical narrative. It also further suggests that Jesus was surrounded by people who shared similar ethnic and racial backgrounds. Additionally, Jesus had interactions with the Samaritans, a group that was ethnically mixed with Israelite and non-Israelite ancestry. The Jews of that time often looked down upon Samaritans, considering them outsiders. However, Jesus broke these barriers and engaged with them, most famously in his conversation with the Samaritan woman at the well. John 4:7-26. This act of inclusivity demonstrates that Jesus did not conform to societal prejudices. Instead, he embraced those who were cast aside. It also reflects his connection to a people who were not exclusively of one ethnic background, but had a rich mixture of Middle Eastern and African ancestry. The presence of Africans in Jesus' circle can also be seen in the Ethiopian eunuch, mentioned in Acts 8:26-40. While this event occurred after Jesus' resurrection, it shows how his message was directly reaching people from African nations early on. The Ethiopian eunuch was an important official in the court of the Queen of Ethiopia, and he was reading the book of Isaiah when the disciple Philip encountered him. This moment signifies the deep spiritual connection between Africa and Jesus' teachings, further proving that his message was never limited to one race or group of people. Jesus' interactions with these diverse groups highlight an important truth. He was not aligned with the ruling class or those who held power. Instead, he lived among the common people: fishermen, farmers, Samaritans, Ethiopians, and other marginalized individuals. His ability to walk among them without distinction suggests that he looked like them, shared their struggles, and understood their experiences on a deeply personal level. The significance of this truth extends beyond historical accuracy. It has a profound impact on how people see themselves in relation to faith. For too long, many have been given an image of Jesus that does not reflect the reality of his world or the people he interacted with. By reclaiming the truth of his identity and the people he walked among, we allow those who have been marginalized to see themselves in his story. Jesus was a man who stood with the oppressed, uplifted the downtrodden, and embraced those whom society rejected. His life was intertwined with people of color, and his presence among them affirms the richness and diversity of the biblical world. Recognizing this truth is not just about history, it is about empowerment. It is about breaking free from the misrepresentations that have been imposed for centuries and embracing a narrative that reflects the true depth of his identity and mission. Jesus did not walk among kings and rulers. He walked among the people. And in doing so, he showed that divinity has always been present among those who were considered the least, proving that their value, their history, and their identity matter just as much as anyone else's. Clue 5. The prophecy of his identity. One of the strongest clues about Jesus' true identity lies in the prophecies that foretold his coming. These ancient scriptures, written long before his birth, provide key insights into his origins, mission, and even his physical appearance. While many have overlooked or reinterpreted these prophecies to fit a more westernized image, a closer examination reveals a different narrative, one that firmly connects Jesus to a people of color and a heritage deeply rooted in African and Middle Eastern history. One of the most striking prophecies comes from Daniel 7:9, which describes a divine figure. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. This description is incredibly significant because once again it highlights the texture of his hair, like pure wool. Woolly hair is a characteristic commonly found among people of African descent. This prophetic vision aligns with the description found in Revelation 1:14 and 15, which also describes Jesus' hair as being like wool and his skin as being like burnished brass, emphasizing a dark complexion. These descriptions are not vague metaphors. They are direct visual representations that tell us something important about Jesus' physical appearance. Another prophecy that provides insight into his identity is found in Isaiah 53:2, which states, "He grew up before him like a tender shoot and like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him." This verse tells us that Jesus did not fit the conventional standards of physical beauty at the time. In a region where darker skin tones were the norm, this suggests that he was not of a strikingly different complexion, but instead resembled the people around him, people of Middle Eastern and African descent. The emphasis on his lack of outward majesty reinforces the idea that his appearance was ordinary for his cultural and ethnic background. The prophecies also provide crucial information about the regions associated with Jesus' ancestry. Hosea 11:01 states, "Out of Egypt I called my son." This verse is later referenced in Matthew 2:13 through 15, when Jesus' family flees to Egypt to escape King Herod's wrath. Egypt, an African nation, became a place of refuge and safety for the young Messiah. The fact that Jesus could live in Egypt without drawing attention to himself strongly suggests that he blended in with the people there, further reinforcing the idea that he was not of European descent, but instead shared physical characteristics with the native population. Additionally, the book of Zephaniah 3:10 makes reference to the people of God coming from beyond the rivers of Cush. The term Cush in the Bible refers to the ancient kingdom located in present-day Sudan and Ethiopia, which was well known for its dark-skinned inhabitants. This further connects the biblical narrative to African heritage and suggests that the people tied to Jesus' lineage and mission were deeply rooted in Africa. Beyond physical descriptions, the prophecies about the Messiah also point to his role as a liberator of the oppressed. Isaiah 61:1 states, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and freedom to the prisoners." This prophecy, which Jesus himself fulfilled, Luke 4:16, verse 21, aligns him with those who have historically suffered under oppression, people who were enslaved, colonized, and marginalized. His mission was not to uphold the ruling class, but to uplift those who had been cast aside. This resonates strongly with the struggles of African and indigenous people throughout history, making it even more powerful when we acknowledge his true heritage. Furthermore, Jeremiah 8:21 contains a lament that many believe reflects the identity of God's chosen people. "For the hurt of the daughter of my people, and my hurt, I am black. Astonishment hath taken hold on me." While some translations interpret this verse differently, the mention of "I am black" has led scholars to explore the racial and ethnic implications of the biblical figures. This reinforces the idea that those closest to Jesus in lineage and heritage were people of color, with deep ties to Africa and the surrounding regions. Understanding the prophecies of Jesus' identity is more than just an exercise in historical accuracy. It is a reclamation of truth. For centuries, artistic depictions and cultural interpretations have distorted his image, presenting him as a figure that aligns more with European standards of beauty and power. However, the scriptures themselves tell a different story, one of a Messiah who looked like the very people who have been historically oppressed, a Savior who walked among those who struggled, and a leader whose roots were deeply intertwined with African and Middle Eastern history. Acknowledging this truth is not about division, but about restoration. It allows those who have been marginalized to see themselves in the story of faith, to recognize that the divine has always been present in their history, and to understand that Jesus was not a figure removed from their experience, but rather one who shared in their struggles. The prophecy of his identity was never meant to be erased. It was meant to be embraced as a source of empowerment, unity, and truth.